This was the first real, I think, conspiracy theory that got me hooked. I think his tag was like Time Traveler 1. He ends up identifying himself as John Titor. So he probably wasn't the first time traveler.
I would need somebody who can really, truly explain it to me.
You have to understand time.
That's where it gets super interesting.
Was presented himself as a soldier from a post-apocalyptic future.
It was like after the war.
Tensions in those eras were very, very high.
I don't know if I want to call them predictions.
According to him, the world of 2036 was ravaged by nuclear war, civil unrest, disease.
Just because, okay, so let's say that tomorrow you find out, holy shit, we have a time machine, right? It's real.
Somebody built this in their garage. It just seems overly complicated to create this technical drawing.
Exactly, yeah. And look, anything is plausible.
Absolutely plausible. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, whether you're tuning in from London to Paris or Tokyo, America, Scotland, Canada, or Mexico. We are the Conspiracy Realist, and we welcome you to another episode of Cocktails and Conspiracies. Tonight, we are diving into a story that perplexed and fascinated internet scholars and sleuths for decades. A tale that appeared out of nowhere, captured the imaginations worldwide, and then suddenly vanished, just like the protagonist himself. Picture this. Early 2000s, a time when the internet was still a wild frontier. Amid the countless forums and message boards, one name emerged from the digital shadows and sparked a frenzy. A self-proclaimed time traveler claiming to be from the year 2036 who had a mission to save humanity. His posts were detailed, filled with technical jargon, and painted a picture of a dystopian future that felt eerily plausible. But who was he? Was he a genius, a prankster, or truly a visitor from the future? His predictions about our timeline were chillingly specific, and his knowledge of future events unnervingly accurate. Yet, just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared, leaving behind a trail of questions and a legion of followers desperate for answers. Join us as we unravel the enigma, sift through the clues, and piece together the puzzle of a man who traveled through time. This is the story of John Titor. And I knew I told you that I was going to hit you with something that you weren't expecting, but you knew. How do you feel about that, Mr. Phillips?
Tighter, 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 tighter.
I had a feeling, well, first off, as becomes ceremonious, cheers and welcome back.
Cheers.
To you and to our listeners out there who by this time, I am certain, have clicked that like and subscribe on YouTube, on Rumble, on Spotify, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter X, wherever it may be. I know for sure you've already liked us and you're following us along, but if you've not, please remember to do that. How do you feel hearing that? John Titor.
Dude, Titor is probably, when you and I first started really talking about conspiracies, it's probably the first one that you and I had ever discussed. You turned me onto it, and I remember my mind was blown. I was like, whoa, what the fuck is this?
Yep.
And then we just we deep dove for years on Titor. I gotta admit, it's been some time since I really thought about it or kind of read up on any of it, but this is a big one, dude.
So we kicked off this entire podcast journey and we sort of broached a lot of subjects, one of which was Titor. And so every time that this topic's kind of come up, I've stepped away from it for two reasons. The first of which is I've always felt in the back of my mind that we talked about it because we sort of shared that story that this was, I could especially say for me, this was the first real, I think, conspiracy theory that got me hooked, that felt like it was tangible and felt like it's something that we can prove or disprove within our lifetime, because the timeline,
Right.
which we'll get into, was going to happen within our, not the edge of our lifetime where we're, we just might make it. It was going to happen within our youth. And so you're right. When we first started talking about it, I think I got you onto it. Our old buddy Matty Nines, Matt Rice, and we became fascinated with it. And that was at the tail end of the whole Titor era too. He had just exited the internet, so that was probably, I want to say we tapped in maybe 2003, 2004,
early
just
2000s for sure
for me.
Yep.
Well, he was in the early 2000s. I think 2000 specifically is when he popped in, or maybe like 99ish, somewhere in that realm. But we tapped in right at the tail end of it, so we just missed the message boards and stuff, which I wish we could have. But
to your point, what was so exciting about it, it was like it was happening like at that point in time. It was happening now, and it still kind of is, right? When you look at the timeline, and we'll talk about that. But that's what's so exciting about it. It's like, man, like, well, is it hit or miss? Like, what's it going to be?
Yep. Yeah, it's going back to that first episode. It's like that's always kind of lingered in the back of my mind, where I knew I wanted to talk about it. I felt like we touched it, and I felt like there's been enough time, enough episodes in between, we can kind of bring it back. The second piece is that I've held out so much hope that we'd be able to find somebody that was married to Titor in some regards, and by that I mean the story and the telling of it. Right. I haven't been able to get in touch with anybody. Maybe this has got a calling card to them out there if you're listening, and we'll talk about some of those names in a little while. And one potential lead that we have on it that we are going to be definitely interviewing. And hopefully I don't jinx it by saying that. But for those completely unfamiliar, John Titor was presented himself as a soldier from a post-apocalyptic future. According to him, the world of 2036 was ravaged by nuclear war, civil unrest, disease, and he had this mission to travel back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer. Very specific and details a little bit later. He claimed it was needed to debug various legacy computer systems in 2036. Again, after nuclear war and whatnot, these computer systems, I guess, became of value to them. However, he made a stop off on his way home in the year 2000, ostensibly for personal reasons, including visiting his family and observing the world he had heard about and what we would later find began to grow up in. Titor's posts... Wow, I should backtrack on that a little bit. Titor started posting on message boards. I believe it was like anomalies.net, maybe?
It was some random like forum message board or something like that.
Yeah, I think at the time it was one of the larger occult conspiracy type groups that would have been out there. It had a bunch of crap on it, but it also had some stimulating things. Think like a Reddit sub or something.
I was going to say, that's kind of the only I shouldn't say only, but that was a little bit of a red flag when I first heard about it. I'm like, it was a very pseudo-type, I don't know if taboo is the right word, but, it was just, it was a forum, if you will, that had a lot of weird stuff, and it was like, why would you choose that as your ground to lay your work? But I digress.
Yeah, but I'm going to challenge you on that. Is that same era that we started finding out about all this stuff? That's when I had Beyond Reality, Auto Club, and I had the Celica. And I remember going to newcelica.net or newcelica.org, whatever it was. It was a forum specifically dedicated to Celicas. It sounds so funny now to think about it because it does sound so bootleg. Right. But at that particular time, that's how the internet really was. Like there was very niche forums that bulletin boards that people would set up and post on it. Again,
and it was like that website you would go to. It wasn't just Reddit. It was before the days of Reddit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't even know. That might have been around. I don't know, but it wasn't.
Well, it wasn't as popular as it is today. Yeah.
Right. I'm not even sure if it was. Definitely MySpace era for us.
Sorry, Reddit, if you're around. I didn't know about you.
Yeah. I didn't start using Reddit until the past couple of years, so it might as well have not been around at that point. But
yeah.
So in any case, he started sharing all these diagrams and these scientific explanations about everything that was going on, about his time machine, how his travel device worked, and how it was installed in a 1967 Chevy Corvette. And according to Titor, the device used two Kerr black holes and can manipulate gravity to send them through time. So now this kicks off about 2 years worth of posts where Titor is communicating back and forth to people on the forums. There are websites out there, and one specifically that I'll reference a lot tonight is going to be johntitor.com, aptly named, that have chronicled all of these posts. They basically
Wasn't there another one?
out.
Wasn't there Titor Times? Am I making that up?
Titor Times is johntitor.com. Yep. It's the exact same website.
I was confusing the two.
Yeah. So there were others that popped up the whole way through. I don't remember what they are at this point, but I think for the most part, most of those sort of collapsed out and vanished into the abyss. But
yeah,
oddly enough, John Titor Times or johntitor.com is still out there. I mean, it quite literally looks like it was made in the early 2000s, if not in the mid-90s. It is a god-awful looking website, but somebody is still paying for it to be there. So, I don't know if they don't realize that their credit card's getting billed every year or if it's intentional to keep it up there. It completely blows my mind. I'd love to get my hands on it and just be able to maybe update it and just kind of retain that bit of history, because I'm worried that one day it is going to kind of disappear at some point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like it's even been updated. It's 2011. It looks like the last story that was up there. I think he was chronicling anything that aligned to it. But in any case, for listeners out there, you can kind of go through and see all of those posts that come through. And I'm looking at it now. November 2000 seems to be the first batch of posts all the way through March 2021. They break it down with the pictures and the predictions and stuff, and we'll dive into that. So the interesting thing is, this guy, complete stranger, comes on there. I think his tag was Time Traveler 1. He ends up identifying himself as John Titor. At this particular time in the internet, not unlike now, people claim a lot of crazy things. So he probably wasn't the first time traveler. Certainly wasn't the last to claim he was from a future. But what separated him from everybody else was his detail and his sophistication in language, where it didn't seem like it was just some Joe Schmo, slugging back a bunch of Red Bulls or Monster Energy drinks, sitting in his pajamas, like a sweatshirt, stained shirt, down in his basement. But it seemed like he actually might have known what he was talking about. Yeah, right? His mother's upstairs making him a meatloaf.
Right. Well, it was that, and then it was also, and we'll get to it, but it was, I don't know if I want to call them predictions, because I guess from his perspective, he wasn't predicting anything. To us, they would be predictions, but it was series of world events, that would eventually come to fruition, and some of them did, some of them didn't, and the timelines are a little wonky, if you will, but that's where it gets super interesting.
So yeah, let's get into that. You called it predictions, and I'm going to stick with predictions, because one of the things, and I think this is what really captivated us the most, is he never spoke in definitives. I mean, he did. He gave what the predictions would be, and we'll cover those.
Sure.
But when he'd say that, he'd just say, you have to understand time. And at this point, the concept of multiverses, really, it wasn't popular. So if you were a comic book reader, you kind of knew what it was. But now it's common nature. Now everyone's watching Marvel movies and Spider-Man's. At the time, even right now, my thought process of multiverses is very, I don't know that I buy into that, but
it still confuses the shit out of me. 100%.
I get it, and the only reason I get it was from a TV show called Sliders. And do you ever heard of Sliders?
No, dude, you are the TV guy.
Come on,
you're the TV guy, bro.
So Sliders, I've always been fascinated by time travel too, so this is probably why. Sliders wasn't about time travel, it was about parallel worlds. And the idea was that these four people, there's one kid, Quinn Mallory, creates this time travel device. Super smart dude, goes to tell his professor about it, has his girlfriend over there, and then some random dude driving by gets sucked up into this vortex, and they travel to an alternate world where just one thing might be different at first. Eventually the series goes on, it's more and more stuff. So it just might be I remember in the early episodes, some subtle tweaks. So red means go and green means stop, and so they only get in a car accident, and the San Francisco Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, instead of being red was blue, or things like that.
It's and subtle differences.
Subtle differences, right? Initially. And then they just keep and they jump around and they slide. Basically, their sliding device breaks. That's how they set up the show, and they keep jumping from universe to universe trying to get home. There's some suspect that they got home once, didn't realize it, because they have a timer before they have to jump again. And so if they don't decide, and if they don't, they get stuck in that area, or so they.
Sounds vaguely familiar. I mean, I can tell you, I've never watched it. Maybe I saw a promo for it. I don't know.
I've watched it like 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, a lot.
Yeah.
The very
closest
last
thing-
season sucks because most of the main cast is gone. But
The closest thing I watched to parallel universes is The Land of the Lost back in the 90s. That's about it.
so there you go. It's
a great
the same
show.
Premise.
It's a great show.
Great show. Absolutely great show. So Sliders was really the reason I would have been aware of parallel worlds, and it wasn't something I always bought into. Concept made sense, but the idea that there's infinite amounts of worlds that just sort of live within the same space, where like every decision you make and every word you choose to say, like even right now as we say different words, spins off parallel worlds. I never really bought that. I feel like it's too massive, too infinite.
You know what?
Too
I
much
would
to
need
comprehend.
somebody who can really truly explain it to me and really break it down in terms that my stupid brain could understand it, because
I think that's possible.
I know. That's kind of the tough part about it, right? Is that
And I'm not saying because
anything's-
your stupid brain.
No,
I'm
I get
saying
it.
just because
I
the
get
mass,
it.
the scale of it.
Exactly, yeah. And look, anything is plausible,
Yeah.
but I don't get it at all. And to that point, I don't necessarily really buy into it, so to speak.
Well, so that's what really started to grab me a little bit with Titor, is he kept talking about timelines and how him even being here has changed our timeline. It's not changed his, and
Right.
everything he predicts could shift. And so that resonated with me because it does make sense. There was always logic to a lot of the responses. And, you know, for those out there listening, I mean, you can pretty much read all the Q&A, people that ask him questions and his responses, and a lot of the subtleties, or a lot of the responses from JohnTitor.com, but also web.archive.org. Once you find the links and dive into it and get directly there, it's archived out there. So it's not like you can't go back and see this stuff. And
Yep.
you'll get that same impression where it's like you are going to, I don't know, just the way he crafted these answers were very well thought out, which of course doesn't exclude the possibility that it was completely made up, but it just felt very direct. It felt very coherent. And it felt very high level. Like he talked about things at a level that was more, I don't know, psychologically inclined, philosophical, I guess is probably a better word. Where
It's a good way to look at it.
I'll give you an example because we've brought this up. We might even brought it up in that very first episode. Who won the World Series 5 years ago?
Exactly. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, and I'm one of the biggest baseball fans out there. It was
Exactly.
probably
You've got
the
the freaking hat
Astros. It was probably the Astros, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
So that would have been 2019. Let's just see 2019 World Series winners. The Washington Nationals
Fucking
won the
hate
2019
Nationals.
World Series, but he
I
beat the
fucking hate
Astros.
the
So you were
Nationals.
close. They were in the World Series.
You're right.
One of the things Titor said that really resonated with me at the time, and I think probably how I hooked you, was that quote is you had people coming in there and he called it out. He's like, you know, when you have a time traveler that comes in, or they claim that they're a time traveler, the first thing people ask to try to validate who they are, validate their story, is who won such and such a sporting event in such and
Right.
such a year. Now he's coming from 2036, and at the time it's called November 2000. That's 36 years ago.
Right, exactly.
I couldn't even tell you if some of these sporting events, even like the World Series, the Super Bowl, like these are the biggest sports in the world, the Stanley Cup. I couldn't remotely tell you who was even in contention 36 years ago
Not-
from today.
not even close.
And the average person
Absolutely.
couldn't. There will be some people that will remember that have super recall.
Sure.
Maybe it was your team, and if you recognize the year, you might get it.
Right.
And that resonated because that's right. Well, what's the first thing people ask? You watch Back to the Future. What's the first thing they say is, "Oh, well, who won this?" and like, gamble this
Yep.
and pick out your stuff. You don't remember that stuff because it's so nominal. And it always makes me think. I love to tie in pro wrestling to everything we do, but they always talk about pro wrestling and wins and losses. And there was something that was said, I don't remember by who, I don't remember by when, doesn't really make a difference. But the moral of the story is nobody ever remembers the wins and the losses. They remember the moments, right? And the moments that made it all happen. So Hulk Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant, Shawn Michaels winning the world championship for the very first time, Hogan and The Rock staring down in the ring because it was generation to generation. Pro wrestling is built around moments, and that's how it's became so popular. Think to sports too. Which one of the greatest? Talking about the NFL, pro football, we're both big Giants fans. For those that do not know that, let's go Giants! Big season ahead, Giants 100. But one of the greatest clips in Giants history is Odell Beckham jumping up and one-handing catching that ball in the back of the end zone over Dallas Cowboy. Nobody talks about or remembers the fact that not only were they losing at that moment when that happened, but they lost the game.
They did.
But that
That's right.
moment is enshrined in like NFL clips all over the place. Giants lost. But Beckham has that historic moment now that will always be in highlight reels forever. Because it's a moment, right? The wins and losses mean nothing.
Right.
In any case, that I think was one of the pieces that really locked me in and said, all right, well, like this guy is talking in such a way where it's like, all right, I get it. Like you're dismissing a lot of you're not even feeding into it, right?
Sure.
Which I think a lot of people that they probably would have gotten to that point. They would have fed into it a little bit and tried to really justify what they're saying and who they were.
No, you're right. We did talk about this on the very first episode, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I could barely remember something that happened last week, right? Like, I couldn't tell you 30 years ago. And also, and maybe you know, I don't know off the top of my head, how old he would have been at that point in time, right? Like, was he even around? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't recall what he said his age was, or if he ever divulged that information.
He did eventually. He divulged that he would have been a young kid because his family lived in Florida.
And they sold oranges.
I couldn't even remember.
No, I swear to God, I believe that being a thing. It was like after the war. It was supposed to be after this post-apocalyptic, this nuclear war. His family was getting by selling oranges. I don't know why. It's one of those weird things that sticks out to me. Watch that completely wrong. Somebody in the comments will be like, dude, you're on fucking crack. Like, never happened. I remember being a thing.
Well, them being like farmers was a big thing. So I think you might be onto something there. What they farmed, I don't know. We'll lean on the oranges right there. So let's dive into the predictions. What of the predictions do you remember? What were some of the topics that were hit?
One of the biggest ones was the civil unrest surrounding what was supposed to be the last presidential election in U.S. history. That's probably the biggest one for me. Well, besides the whole, World War, that's the biggest.
Yep. So it's funny because I was on Reddit recently and I forgot what we were discussing specifically. I think I had made a post to the effect of, what was your favorite conspiracy theory that nobody ever talks about? And somebody had said something about John Titor, and of course I had to respond to that and say, I'm obsessed with that one. That's like one of my favorite ones. Yeah. And we went back and forth on like the full discussion of Titor and all the here it is right now. What's your favorite conspiracy that's not talked about enough? And I actually went through. Oh my God, there's 190 comments on that one now. I don't think I'm finding my comment now. But I actually went through and I outlined all of those items. What you're referencing is, I guess I want to say the year was around 2004-ish or 2008, right?
It was either 4 or 8. It was definitely sometime around there.
Right. I'm hoping I can find it at some point here. But the long and short of it is that they said that basically, there was some skepticism around the entire around the entire election, where there was fraud in the election. Oh, I found it right here. So the summary: in 2004, a second American Civil War begins, characterized by conflicts between various U.S. factions, eventually leading to a full-scale civil war by 2008. In 2005, a major disease outbreak would spread. This would contribute to the chaos and breakdown of social order. 2008, civil war would be in full swing, society breaking down into various enclaves of warrior factions. Presidential elections would be disrupted, leading to significant political instability. So that's 2008. So I want to stop there. Mm-hmm. So civil war is in full swing. What's the one thing you learned in history class about wars and when they begin?
I don't know what you.
Come on, you don't remember history?
I mean, I remember, a lot of history. It was quite literally my favorite subject, but I don't have a good answer to your question.
So the one thing that always stuck with me going through all those history classes in high school was that war always started way before people realized it. There was small events that served as the catalyst that fed into the actual war.
Sure.
There wasn't just a day
bullets are fired. Right. It's something happened, could have been many years ago, that stoked the fires that eventually led to a war. Okay. Yep.
Right. And sometimes bullets are fired, but they weren't fired on a battlefield. It wasn't like we marched up and said, yo, bro, here we are. We're ready to go.
Right,
We're,
right.
You know, those classic like fight videos, which is like, come on, bro. Let's just go at it. And like you're waiting for somebody to swing. It's poking and it's prodding and it's shady shit behind the scenes. So here's some things that aligned. I'm going to reread these things. A Second American Civil War would begin, characterized by conflict between various U.S. factions. How would you define U.S. factions, if you could just throw them out there?
I mean, I think the two easiest ones would be the political parties.
Interesting, right? Two factions, and they're going at war. Now, anybody can say blah blah blah. That's not it. It's political parties do it. Fine, that's fine to think about that. The reason I want to bring that up is because what ends up happening in, like, let's say 2018 is you have Republicans and Democrats that are just killing each other. Politics have gotten really crazy. But even throughout history, what's stimulated the war? Whether it's, you know, the Revolutionary War, whether it's, you know, any other sort of internal conflict, the Civil War, you have the North and the South, which were effectively Republicans and Democrats, or what would become Republicans. It always does have some sort of political connotation to it. So we'll let that linger.
It's always either political or religious, right? It's generally one of those.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. But it's groups that, you know, exist on some plane.
Sure.
2005, a major disease outbreak would spread. At the time, what he likened it to, because that's what was known at that time, was mad cow disease. A mad cow disease like plague would kind of spread through the world right there. What does that sound like?
I don't know, something that destroyed everybody's life about 4 years ago.
And did it cause any sort of divide in people?
Dude, the biggest divide you've ever seen, right? I am one of those. We're talking about COVID. I am one of those, and I will proudly say it. Do not forget, do not forgive.
Yep.
There's no forgetting, there's no forgiving.
So I think you guys listening out there probably know where we're getting, or where we're going with this. The direct line is this would contribute to the chaos and breakdown of societal order. What happened to society in 2020 within the context of that disease? Just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Or I guess
It's
2019 is technically CV19 into
19 into 20, yeah.
So 2008, the Civil War would break out in its full swing, with society breaking down to various enclaves of warring factions. Presidential elections would be disrupted, leading to significant political instability. Now, what it ends up going into, and you can find this on the johntitor.com website and really dive into it because it's bits and pieces all over the place, is effectively there ends up being all sorts of chaos around the election. And one of the exact quotes, and I couldn't find it when I was writing that Reddit post, and I couldn't find it again leading into today, was that there would never be, after that 2008 election, another legitimate election because it was ripe with election fraud. There was so much disdain around that election. It was fraudulent, and then there would never be another legitimate election throughout the war.
And I think that's one of the important things that you say is legitimate election. He didn't say that there would never be another election again. He said there would never be another legitimate election. That's a very important distinction, right? Because you could say, well, we've had many since then, right? And even if you want to shift those timelines up and take a look at some other presidential races, you know, there's still have been some others, or there's going to be, at least as far as we know right now recording this.
Right. That's where I wanted to go. The tighter timeline was really cool for us because by 2015-ish, we would know if we're going to be into nuclear war and we'd be able to check in or check out. By 2020 was supposed to be post-war recovery. It's 2024. We haven't had nuclear war yet. That all checks out.
Wood, baby.
But when you right, God help us all. But when you shift those timelines, and they're not exact, and if you take what Titor said, that your timelines could change, again, hypothetically here, we're not saying this is true or not true, but 2004, Civil War begins, characterized by conflicts between U.S. factions. That's 2008 election. That's a lot of controversy around that election. The world has never been at each other's throats like they were when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That was hell on earth.
Yep.
2005, for their timeline, is a major disease outbreak which shifts society, creates chaos, breaks down societal order. That is COVID. It was nationwide lockdowns. It was global lockdowns. He does
Yeah.
not specify that this is only in the United States. This is global pandemic now. A mad cow disease, like, for those that don't remember mad cow disease, it was in humans. It jumped from animals to humans, which is supposedly what COVID did. Initially, cases appeared to be fatal, incurable brain illnesses. And then eventually they realized that it wasn't that fatal and it was easier to get underhand. Again, sounds very familiar to what we ended up experiencing.
Yeah, isn't that all the same bullshit they fed us about COVID?
Isn't that all the same bullshit they fed us about COVID? That is one question. Again, totally respectable. You can say that this happens with every plague and pandemic, and that might be another discussion for another day where we try to look at the trajectory of how these plagues and pandemics tend to hit us. But just something to keep lingering in the back of your mind there. 2008, a civil war breaks down. Society breaks down into warring factions, and presidential elections are disrupted. Where does that bring us in our timeline is the 2020 election. Now, we are not making any speculations here for you moderators or fact checkers out there that are quick to press a button. You've hit a couple of our videos already. All we are saying is that there is ample discussion, and in our opinions, or my opinions, I won't even speak for you, ample evidence that there was tampering in the 2020 election. Now, you don't have to believe that. If you subscribe to that, and there was interference in that 2020 election, Trump versus Biden version 1, does that not align with the presidential elections were disrupted? Which, by the way, disrupted also could mean that you couldn't go to the polls. You had to mail in vote. So there's a disruption, and then he subsequently says in later posts, there's no legitimate elections, and that's where election fraud struck. And I never thought that was possible. And that's when, like, as we started to kind of piece these together, you and I stopped caring about Titor in 2015 when the world didn't blow up. Not forgot about it, but it sort of disappeared, would you say?
Right, yeah. I mean, it wasn't something that, because of the timelines, we were like, oh, well, that sucks. It didn't happen. Oh, I mean, I guess it was good that the world didn't blow up.
Maybe not sucks,
but per the story, it was like, okay, well, I guess it was bullshit.
Right. It was bullshit.
And it still could be. Who knows?
Still could be completely bullshit. And we'll get into some theories around that in a little bit. But the fact that all these other events kind of aligned and the election having election fraud as a lingering idea, we're going to find that out this upcoming November, is that if the second election goes a certain way with the certain candidates, I mean, it's going to become very obvious, right? And that is what brings us to that 2015 timeline.
Yep.
The United States was split into 5 regions based on various factors and different military objectives. Just a year ago, Texas was talking about seceding and becoming their own independent nation. I want people to remember that for a second. This is not hyperbole. This was an actual legitimate news story and a discussion in Texas. And there was other southern states that were aligning with that, where they were, again, was it really going to happen? Probably not. But there was a contingent of southern states that were talking about breaking off. We already know that some of the northeastern states are heavily blue and would break off themselves. So it's just something to think. But it also says that in 2015, Russia would launch a nuclear strike against the United States and the U.S. counterattacks, resulting in World War III. What is going on right now in the world?
Wait a minute. Are we provoking Russia into a nuclear war today?
We might have been, or maybe are, funneling hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia's neighbor, Ukraine. And Tim, we are provoking a nuclear war with a superpower.
I shouldn't even smile like talking about that, but it just when you look at the coincidences and the similarities between the story and what's actually happening in world news today, it's uncanny at the very least.
It is uncanny. I love where your head's at today. It's like I have to repeat some of those things for emphasis. Honestly, though, because I want people to kind of let that resonate, is you have a series of events which were outlined in years. And again, we're cherry picking from the list. He talks about these things in depth over and over. But an American Civil War, characterized basically by warring opinions. If you want to look at the Civil War tangibly, what happened in 2018 that you might constitute civil disobedience, civil war in America? Anything come to mind?
Could that possibly be the hundreds of riots that took place in major cities around the U.S. as citizens just burned cities to the ground and looted stores?
Interesting.
Primarily in blue cities, and the authorities did absolutely nothing to stop it, all in the name of protest.
all in
Would
the
that
name
be
of
it?
protests. And then some of those protests sort of materialized into defund the police campaigns.
Yeah.
I mean, if
How'd
there's
that work
not
out?
right, I mean, you literally have oh God, what's that kid from Minnesota that shot that one guy during the protest, Kyle Rittenhouse,
Yes.
right? You want to talk about civil war? You can define
Right.
it any way you want, but it's when the way I would define it is when two people of the same country, two factions of the same country, two sects of groups of the same country are battling it out openly and there's no
Sure.
repercussion. Kyle Rittenhouse was there with hundreds of other men protecting their city when rioters were coming in with Molotov cocktails and burning buildings to the ground. They weren't walking down the streets with picket signs. They were throwing Molotov cocktails. Rittenhouse was getting assaulted in the street and shot somebody, killed somebody, and hurt
Yeah.
other people in the name of protection of not only his city but himself, which is, again, it's spun off all this craziness and all this other stuff that's gone on in the world. But I mean, we had all these riots, we had all these people fighting back and forth. I mean, that right there on paper, history couldn't look back at that and say that is a civil war. Now, is it the same civil war that
Sure.
we had when it was the North versus the South? No. But when that civil war started, it wasn't like that either. So I'll leave it like that.
Yeah, look, I think to your point, was it officially declared a civil war? No. But
Yep.
when you take a look at what happened, and yes, I know the greatest loss of American lives ever, as it pertains to war, was during the Civil War, obviously, because you had Americans fighting one another. So I know you can't compare the two on scale, but if you look at the details of it, what's the difference, right? What's the difference? Mm-hmm. There's really none.
Yep. Really none. I want to kind of touch on Russia a little bit now too, because we fast forwarded to 2015 in the timeline, or I guess I jumped around a little bit there. So let me take that back just to bring us ahead. We talked about a series, a confluence of events. So you've got that breakout, you've got the disease, which aligns perfectly to COVID. You've got the civil wars in full swing. So the warring factions are in full swing by 2008 in his timeline, 2020 now in our election, where they outright says the election is disrupted and there's another legitimate election again. I mean, that is bang, 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 three events within, in his timeline, a 4-year span. Within our timeline, just about a 4-year span, with the middle events kind of shuffled around a little bit. 2005 instead of 2019, basically a year in the opposite direction. 2015, we're now in the Civil War, which is give or take 5 years after their 2008 election, which effectively puts us to where we are now. We're about a year shy of what would be Joe Biden's post year after, which also doesn't exclude us from the fact that we could get into World War. We are on the brink of World War III with Russia, who can nuke the living
Could
shit
literally
out of us.
happen.
Yeah, and
At
we're
any moment.
funneling missiles to Ukraine. I mean, they're missiles that might as well just have a big American flag on it, or bombing
yeah, it's-
hospitals and shit.
It's a proxy war, yeah.
Out of control. So in 2000, I wanted to pull this up for context here because I think it's important to suggest that the U.S. would be in a nuclear war with Russia. I mean, again, you can kind of pull that out of your back pocket. It's post-Cold War era. In 1990s, it says, it was a time of significant change as Russia transitioned from the Soviet socialist state to a market-oriented economy and sought to redefine its position on the global stage. 2000 saw the election of George W. Bush, and it also saw the election of Vladimir Putin in March. So this isn't Vladimir Putin that we know today. This is Vladimir Putin, who is now being elected into a market-driven economy that is friendly with the United States. Could you have surmised at that particular moment that Russia and the United States by 2015 are going to have tensions again? Sure, we've had it in the past, both big superpowers, but at that particular time, it's not like we were still at war with Russia where it was fear-mongering to that degree. You take that back to like the 60s when we're in a Cold War with Russia. I mean, again, I'll bring in wrestling. Pro wrestling's always built characters in that older era, not so much today because God forbid everyone's too sensitive now, but they built characters in that older era based on who the U.S. people didn't like. So when they had people like Nikolai Volkov that wore a Russian flag and went out there and sang the Russian national anthem in like the 60s, 70s, that pissed people off. Like they tried to kill that guy, legitimately tried to stab him. The Iron Sheik, who would be Iranian because there was tensions with Iran, they tried to kill him. And when Sergeant Slaughter defected and to side with the Iron Sheik, they tried to kill him too. Like that was a U.S. news story because he's siding with these terrorist countries out there that want to kill us. So I just want to.
Did they legitimately try to kill him? Like,
oh yeah,
just like random people, fans, really?
Oh yeah. So back in those
fucking
early days of
episode on
wrestling. Oh, dude, there's a TV series called Dark Side of the Ring. Early seasons are so good, but it talks a lot about people who actually really, really believed that wrestling was real. It was a well-kept secret for 100 years, pretty much, right? And so when people did this stuff on television, they believed it. And so why that's important, it's wild, right? That's why, wrestling's still real to me. You see that quote all the way around.
Yeah.
Most people, like even when reporters asked, there was this one guy, oh God, I can't remember his name. It wasn't Dr. Death. Oh God, it's irrelevant. Well, I guess it's not that irrelevant what his name is, but a reporter was calling him out because there were some people that would basically get chewed up and spit out of wrestling. When Hulk Hogan first tried out, they broke his leg. They broke Hogan's leg when they were training him. He didn't know wrestling was fake. He thought it was real. Everyone thought it was real, and they tried out. So they broke his fucking leg, and he came back and ended up becoming Hulk Hogan. Once you get the shit kicked out of you, if you're willing to come back, then they teach you the secrets.
Right.
There were some guys that basically got the shit kicked out of them. They learned a little bit of the secrets, and they defected, tried to leak it out to the public. A news broadcaster walked out and started calling out the WWF at the time that it was fake. And this one wrestler said, "Oh, is this fake?" Whacks the guy upside the fucking head, blows out his eardrum, and drops the guy to the floor. Had charges pressed against him. Anything. They took that seriously. Now, huge digression there. Getting back on track. The reason I bring that up is because tensions in those eras were very, very high. So when you said that you aligned with Russia, if you were anti-American, that was like prosecutable by death for your average American person. Like they despised that.
Sure.
And so this wasn't, and that holds true today. What happened after 9/11? People saw a Muslim at a gas station. What were they trying to do?
Yeah.
Right? Like call it racism, if you will. Call it prejudice, probably is a little bit better. But when you are impacted by a specific country or foreign nation, with the exception of today, because you're not allowed to be mad at anybody for any reason, but when you are impacted by that, you have preconceived notions. Whether they're valid or not, it doesn't matter. People have them. And so
I remember,
you can prey on those insecurities.
Like, bodegas and delis across the city at that time after 9/11, owned by anybody of Middle Eastern origin, they were attacked continuously across all five boroughs. And I'm sure throughout the whole U.S. I can only speak for my childhood and where I grew up, but I'm sure throughout the whole country, that 100% happened.
Yep. I remember gas station attendants were just getting mugged and get shit. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. But you're preying on people's fears. In the year 2000, there was no fears to prey on because Russia wasn't an adversary anymore. And the bulk of the people that would have believed that were much older. They weren't on the internet. So they probably didn't even know this story existed. So it was an interesting choice to choose Russia as the opponent and not maybe a Middle Eastern country, which seemed to be more aligned with where war might have been for the U.S. at that particular time.
Yes, because if you think about it, right, we had Desert Storm that occurred in the 90s. We already went to war with Iraq. At that point in time, Saddam Hussein was still the leader of Iraq. We now know today in 2024 that it was mostly propaganda that was fed to us in regards to the need for the U.S. to go back into Iraq. To your point, it would have been much easier for Titor to place that blame or say that, hey, something's going to happen with a Middle Eastern country. So that's a really, really good point that I've never thought of until now. Good job.
Yeah, there we go. Buddy. That just came up with that right now. Who knew? Who knew a little rum and ginger soda was gonna stir some interesting ideas here. It wasn't all gloom and doom for John Titor. He also talked about societal changes, which I always found kind of fascinating. The U.S., according to his predictions, or I guess his recollection of it, effectively broke off into smaller sects. So like after those warring factions happened, you broke the U.S. into different parts. Omaha, Nebraska, ironically enough, became the new capital of the United States, or I forgot what they actually ended up calling them. I think it might still be the United States, but they were sort of around segregated
and saying like we need to buy land in Omaha.
Dude, I remember looking it up regularly. Like I'd see some little shack out there that was like $20,000. Like we were a little young at the time, but if I had the money, I would have freaking probably bought it at that time for sure. I was fully. Now I don't know if I would want to live in Omaha, Nebraska, but Jesus,
no offense to Omaha, Nebraska, but I like Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little cold for me, so maybe some offense there.
I need the beach.
So to Tim's orange farmer theory, a lot of what they talked about is technology regressed after the wars, as some might expect. If you nuke the shit out of each other, Russia apparently nukes the United States. That pretty much ends by 2020. So for about 5 years worth of war and survivors rebuild society. They focus on decentralized and local forms of government. Diseases obviously are an issue because there's a lack of organized medicine, but the economy kind of stabilizes or healthcare stabilizes. But communities, and this is the important part of the farming aspect, become more centralized, right?
Yep.
So they break away from these massive conglomerates of what we have right now. You basically live within your community. You're growing your own food. You're trading. Kind of goes back to the things the way they were. And there's obviously advancements now technologically, rise of a new internet system, which is talked about right now with the. I know you don't know this, but when we had Todd
You're
Feehan
gonna
on
have
here,
to fill me in on this shit.
so former guest of the show, Todd Feehan, talked to us off air a lot about ideas, right? And he's fascinated by internet. And him and I talked for about an hour as Tim sat there and probably wanted to wrangle our necks. But one of the things we talked about is
there.
right, was the possibility of like a new internet. And so as we are on the cusp right now of quantum computing, and I'm not diving into this, it stands to completely change the way the internet is. It becomes all decentralized. It becomes super fast, super massive, bigger. It makes what we have now, infantile in the grand scheme of things. We are now that ball, that little rock, Earth, in the vast universe, which becomes quantum computing, which obviously sets the tone up for everything else down the line. So, again, in early 2000, would you have known about quantum computing? Probably not. By 2007, I guess, when I was in college, we talked about it. It was very, very, very early discussions. So if you're very much in that industry, maybe it was hypothesized at that time. Not far to think that computing wouldn't become more powerful, but for him to suggest a rebuilding of the internet was curious in a time where the internet is still in its infancy and it wasn't even to this level. Then, of course, advancement in space travel. I'm just going to brush over that because it is what it is there. A lot of philosophical things, too. We talked about it before. Is what are the things you ask about, right? You ask about the sports. You ask about the lottery and stock picks and things. And he really hammered down on that. And that's what I thought humanized him a lot, is because as much information as he brought up about the time travel aspects, he was always quick to come back and say things like, think about your family. And that became sort of almost like a lingering theme for a lot of what Titor talked about is family and the importance of family and how family becomes stronger for you in this post-apocalyptic timeline.
It was almost like I almost took it as like a warning of like, hey, like shit's gonna go bad at some point, so relish what you have with your family right now, because you don't know what's gonna happen to you in the future. And granted, you could say that, well, anybody could say that, right? I mean, I could tell you and say, Shane, you really gotta just take a moment and stop and think every once in a while and be grateful for your family, of course. But to your point, I think it's very interesting for somebody who is if you're looking at it from the skeptic's perspective of, this guy's all bullshit. It's just a very interesting route to go, if you will.
Very interesting route to go. Yep. And it was always done with like a little bit of snark. So like there was the snark in there, which kind of humanized him a little bit more. Not that AI was a thing at that particular time, but it is just, I don't know. To me, it's always been worth mentioning that he was very humanized. Yeah. He often talked, when he was asked about technology, he knew enough to explain how he got here. But when people asked about the intricacies of it, his response is, well, let me ask you, Tim, how do you build a TV?
Yeah, that's a great
How's
question.
the internet? How's the internet work? How's your cell phone work?
I think we got some wires.
Right. And it was another thing. Yeah. It's like the same discussion about the sports as you don't remember these things. We take technology for granted. And just because you are doing something or using something doesn't mean you know how it's built to the granular level.
Right.
He is the time traveler, so he's working with the government to come back to do whatever he's doing, right? It doesn't mean he knows how to use it.
Exactly. I've always thought about, like, what would happen if I went, if I was able to travel back in time and I told somebody, hey, man, listen, in the future, you're going to have this little computer in your pocket, and they'd stop you and go, what's a computer? And I'm like, oh, that's a great fucking question. How do I really explain what a computer is, right? But point being, right, if you were to go back 50, 100 years ago and tell people about the technology that we're going to have today, right? Mobile phones, computers, doesn't matter, you name it. They'd look at you like you're a crazy person, right? Because they'd ask you, well, how does it work? And I'd be like, I don't fucking know, man. I sell shit for a living. I couldn't tell you.
If you took this, what we have right now, and took it back 30 years ago, where this cell phone outpowers the computers that were effectively running the world 30 years ago, which is the timeline of John Titor to now, 30 years, right? They'd be blown away. They'd have absolutely no idea. But again, like you said, you don't know how it's going to be work or how it's going to work.
Yeah.
All right, because I love the screen sharing, and it's become a little bit of a staple here. I'm going to bring up some pictures here. This was the other aspect of Titor that I think really became, I guess, like a linchpin for believability of the story. Okay? There are internet sleuths all out there that are way, way, way smarter than we are. Okay? Nobody has been able to disprove any of these photos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not pulled from a movie that anybody's recognized. The photos have been backtracked. They've been looked up elsewhere. Of course, the quality sucks because this was posted in 2000, so you have to assume the technology at that point. So here we go. This is a picture of the time travel device right inside here, which is inside that Chevy Corvette. Okay? There's one little picture. So it does look like there's a device. Now, could somebody have built something with metal and set it all up and put it in there? Of course. I want to jump to another picture. Here is more of what this particular device looks like. Okay. Again, could they have built something based on what we're seeing? Of course. Here's another photo of that device. Okay. This is what got me.
In a while. Yeah.
Right.
Look at that schematic.
Right. There's one thing for you to tell me that somebody built this in their garage. Sure. Absolutely plausible. I totally believe that. I totally believe you could have staged it for a photo. But then to go in and build a schematic, which, again, we are not engineers here. So you can look at the schematic and tell me that all this shit is just kind of thrown together. Right. But knowing what I know now about how computers work, I mean, it looks like what you have are fans here, cooling fans. It looks like what you have, you know, there's different coils that are set up in here that could be processing power, that could be transmitting heat from one section to another. It just seems overly complicated to create this technical drawing when you could have gotten away with just building this box. But to build this box and pretty much align these pieces to where they would align here, I don't know, man. And it's never been disproven. Nobody's ever come back and said this is a schematic for A, B, and C. Again, you could have taken a computer and maybe done this with your own computer tower back then was probably just as big as this. I mean, I'm being a little
close to it,
but those things were massive in the 2000s. Yeah. But to have written this schematic, which could have been lifted from somewhere else, if you were a technical drawer, maybe you did that. But if you were a technical drawer, you wouldn't be building this. And maybe it was a team of people. I don't know. Here's the alleged logo. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's what's interesting, right?
Bring the drawing.
People, it's not even necessarily about that specifically. It's about all of them and the whole story in general, right? Yep. People have faked a lot of shit. There's been a lot of hoaxes throughout the world, from UFOs to Bigfoot to the Loch Ness Monster, right? And let's go back to Bigfoot for a second. The most famous one, I couldn't even tell you the guy's name, but it's the one that everybody knows, right? When you think of the picture of Bigfoot, it's the guy who apparently was in that giant monkey suit, right? And so when you think about people doing these hoaxes, why are they doing them? For notoriety, right? To say, I discovered this, I saw this, right? I'm the person, right? Look at me. It's for notoriety, right? It's seeking attention. There's an end game to it. But when you look at Titor, right? There's no end game there. There's no notoriety. He never came out in public and said, hey, this is me, my name's John Titor, right? There's nothing to gain from it. Now, that's not to say that this person didn't get you some kind of personal satisfaction by doing this. He very well could have, but it's very different from the hoaxes that we've seen pulled with some other notable things like Loch Ness and Bigfoot and things like that. So to go to all of these great lengths to fabricate this story, to communicate with people on message boards, and then build and photograph this shit, that's wild, dude. Wild.
It's very well could be.
Very well could be, but it's just something. It doesn't seem as likely to me.
I mean, I'm in total agreement with you there. It just seems like it's an awful big effort to go through. To your point, for not even getting the notoriety for it, and maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe it was just a fun little game at the time, and. There was, we kind of left it out earlier, but it's worth bringing up, is there was communication with Art Bell, who was the original host of Coast to Coast Radio, world famous for anybody in this arena. So he was really big on the story. He's the one that really brought a lot of attention to it after it had popped up on some of the forums here. I want to jump off into some of the players in this in just a second. But before I do, for those on YouTube, check this out. This is the logo, the badge for, I guess, Titor's group or whatever they had called it. Let me actually see what they actually call it on here. I'm zoomed in so much I got to pull it back here. I don't know what this form really was. It was just nothing here. Yeah, his military logo. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
Again, they're relatively simplistic. I'm not to say somebody can't draw that, but again, that is a technical drawing. You're doing that on a computer. You're not doing that by hand. It's way too accurate for that. So, all right, I'm going to stop my screen share there. All right, so we talked about some of the players, and we talked about some of the notoriety and the things that were attached to that and what could potentially come from it. Biggest name out there is going to be Oliver Williams. Oliver Williams becomes a significant figure in the John Titor narrative, as he is the owner and the person maintaining of JohnTitor.com, John Titor Times. He has archived all of Titor's posts and information related to his story, and has pretty much been the sole person to this point keeping that story alive. But there's no real connection. Like the connection with Titor is completely unclear. Nobody really knows what's going on right there.
What do you mean? There's no connection, meaning that there's no connection between Titor and this guy and why he would
there's
want
right. There's no reason why, outside of being really fascinated. My inclination on Oliver Williams is he's probably a guy like us that was there at the right time, right place, and maybe he was into some other shit and he always categorized it or chronicled it, or maybe he was just an avid reader of it and decided okay, this has some weight to it, and I'm just going to log all this stuff down. He's probably the guy still paying for it right now, whether he knows it or not. I don't know how to get in touch with this guy. If anybody's out there, or for God forbid, Oliver, if you're listening out there, come on, man, we'd love to talk to you about it and get your opinion on it. But he was the guy that seemed to really be the front after Titor disappeared and vanished. He'd be the guy you talk to about Titor. He became the de facto expert. So I think fingers pointed at him because he became the last person to really carry the story.
Okay, yeah.
There's the Larry Haber theory. So Larry Haber is an entertainment lawyer out of Florida, and has been linked to Titor through his representation of the Titor family, who supposedly supported John's claims. So some believe that Larry Haber, along with his brother, who was a computer scientist, could be behind the hoax. The reason for that, and I'd have to brush up on how this happened, is there was a P.O. box that was associated to Titor, and that was down in wherever it was in Florida. That P.O. box ends up somehow being connected to Larry Haber, and I think it was close enough to his office. Now, if you buy the story that he was the lawyer for the Titor family, that adds up. Okay, so he's got a P.O. box that was handling all this stuff, so on and so forth. Could he have created... He is an entertainment lawyer. That doesn't mean he's a producer or a filmmaker, but he is a lawyer for entertainment. It
doesn't even mean he's creative. He's a lawyer.
Doesn't mean he's creative. His brother was a computer scientist, so the technical aspects could have been a tag team right there, where they're working through it. He's crafting a story because maybe he aspired to be creative, and maybe he's planning on owning the rights. Maybe he does own the rights. I think there was talks about them doing a movie at one point, and that really never materialized or anything of that nature. But that one always struck me as having some weight to it, where it added up. Anybody that ever has a financial interest, I've always got to kind of bat my eyes at a little bit. Nothing's materialized to the best of my knowledge. But
you know what I just thought of? Not to throw you off your game and what you're talking about here, right? But and I get that the timelines could be different, but wouldn't this mean that John Titor would be here today? Right? It's
correct. He's here right now.
This happened in 2036.
He's here right now.
Where the fuck are you, John? Come on, Conspiracy Realist.
Maybe he's out there. So the obvious thing out there is, why don't you look up who John Titor is? Why don't you look him up? Titor was not his real last name or his family's last name. There is speculation that it could just be, I guess, a pseudonym, or maybe his names are jumbled, and it could be his pen name. There's speculation that his name could just be jumbled, or Titor is part of something else, or you change the letters around and it comes up to somebody else. I've read a lot of those theories. For the sake of bearing with time today, we're not going to dive into all of them. But there's a lot of different theories that you can kind of dive into as to what his identity really is. But don't think that people didn't try to look him up.
Yeah.
They did. They tried to hunt him down in Florida and find his family, but he said that right out of the gate that he was going to do what he can to protect his family and their privacy, and honestly him, because you never know, people could be malicious, but maybe he is out there listening. Which brings us. There was another woman, and I don't remember her name here. Oh gosh, it's slipping my mind. It wasn't in the notes I had pulled here, but I've read about it before. So there was this particular woman that seemed to have a lot of communication with John offline as well, and seemed to be a relay between it. There was no real connection that said that she really knew much else beyond being more or less a pen pal for him.
Yes, I remember that.
I'd have to find her. Yeah, I don't remember what her name is, and I couldn't find it anywhere. It's got to be down deep in the archives, and I couldn't bring myself to reread through everything again.
It's a lot.
Because that's a rabbit hole.
It's
I can't
a lot
dig
of
out.
content.
So much. It's almost a year and a half, almost 2 years worth of posts. But that would be another one that I'd love to maybe find. One last name I want to bring up as we kind of bring this towards its exciting conclusion here is Joseph Matheny. And I may or may not be pronouncing that wrong. If that name sounds familiar to you, Tim, or to anybody else, his name surfaces a lot with other conspiracy theories. He is a writer and a technologist. He's been in technology, and he's very big into writing creative endeavors. So Matheny is actually known for creating the alternate reality game. And by game, I mean not a game in a traditional sense. If you think along the lines of like a Dungeons and Dragons, it's a board game where you pretty much just make up all the rules and you make up a story and you talk to the story. Well, in the early 2000s, there were games like that, right? Where you crafted these worlds and you sort of created quests through them, right?
Yes.
Based within the constraints of this. Effectively with Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of these board games are. So Joseph Matheny created a game called Ong's Hat.
I was just going to say, this is the guy that has something to do with Ong's Hat, doesn't it? Yes.
This is Ong's Hat, New Jersey. And some suspect that he might have been involved in crafting the Titor narrative as a bit of a social experiment or entertainment. So the premise behind that is that Ong's Hat was actually created or came to prominence just before Titor. So let me look up what that date is real quick. It's regarded as one of the earliest and most influential alternate reality games, dated back to the late 80s, early 90s, from Joseph Matheny. So he developed this narrative. Effectively, the long and short of what Ong's Hat is, and I'm only giving you guys a short synopsis here because as it stands right now, we are scheduled to interview Joseph Matheny on Ong's Hat in a couple weeks. So by the time you guys hear this episode, will probably be a few weeks after that as well.
I told you I drove past it that day, right? I was
you did,
about,
yes.
I was about to go, dude. I wanted to go to Ong's Hat so bad.
I want to go so bad as well.
For those listening, it's an actual place, and we'll get into all of this.
Place.
But in New Jersey, and I happened to drive by it on my way to Pittsburgh the other day.
I had driven by there because I was going out to school to pick something up maybe a week or two ago too, and I was just far enough outside that I wasn't going to drive right by it. But I thought the same thing. Like maybe I should just pit stop over there. I'm like, let me just get home. We will have to make a trip, especially after we do the episode. But effectively, just the short synopsis of it was, it's a place in New Jersey that they said was tied to an old school like religious cult, for lack of a better word that effectively learned how to harness either time travel or alternate dimensions,
multidimensional,
multiverse type stuff, right? And there's an actual little town. It's this little, you couldn't even find it on a map. It's so small. But there are like old ruins in the forest there that look like it. Now, this also dates way back to like the early, like I guess like I don't know. I want to say like 16th century, but it might.
Yeah, I was going to say it's maybe 1700s or something around that.
Right. What he basically, now he's come out and openly admitted that this was something that he made up, but there's a lot of speculation that this was true and the government kind of silenced him, and what he was doing was writing his research, because the way he positioned it was he took actual history and myth around this place, Ong's Hat, because back then they didn't really chronicle some of these small towns, and he wove that into a story that kind of blended reality and fiction and positioned it as if he did research on the building this game. In any case, there are some interviews out there, and there has been some discussion where he's alluded to the fact that he was lightly involved in the Titor story and or knew the people that were behind it and was approached to be deeper involved to craft craft a similar type of alternate reality game, and he wasn't as involved in it. You can bet your bottom dollar that that is going to be on our topic of discussion when we talk to him. Baby. We're going to ask it. A part of me wants him to say no. A part of me would love it to get the answers and really dig down to it. A part of me loves the idea of believing and being able to suspend fact sometimes to just have this vision, right? Like time travel's real and this crazy world, and just the confluence of events that Titor outlined and how they happened and how they've happened just about 20-ish years later, 18 years later, almost to the T, verbatim. I mean, it's a crazy coincidence, man. It really is. And so I think I struggle with sometimes sometimes reconciling, like, is the world that predictable where you can just make a series of guesses and in some way they will all align? Or is it really we're getting some information from another source, even if it's embellished? I'm not dismissing the fact that, maybe Titor was some degree true, or maybe it was something tied into there. One thing that I forgot that just clicked in my mind about embellishment, about leaning on true facts, is at the time of Titor, he referenced CERN and a super collider for those that are into science. And so this is one of the things I could never find in any of the synopsises, but it just rung into my mind. Why does that matter? I remember when we found out about it, we looked CERN up, and the page was like coming soon. CERN was brand new at that. Well, it wasn't brand new; it was around, but it was really hitting the news for the first time.
Yeah, it was actually really their first. Real quick.
Yeah, so it was kind of their first experimentations. Happened a little bit after with smashing particles together. Now CERN, to oversimplify the hell out of this, CERN is effectively trying to create and harness black holes or wormholes. They say for interstellar travel, but conceptually it could also be for time travel as well. I had never even heard of what CERN is. CERN, for those that are like comic book fans, think of The Flash and Star Labs and what they did, where they kind of operated, and then all of a sudden it wasn't until they discovered something that people really knew what they were. This is CERN back then. They operated, they existed as this organization, but they really didn't do anything in the year 2000. So to have known what that even was without being a super science geek would be relatively uncanny. And that's where it's
I just
it's
looked
strange
it up.
to me, man. So what do you have on it?
It was built between 98 and 2008, right? So I guess, to your point, if you were really interested in that subject, I guess around the year 2000 it might have been in the news as something that was coming. But
that's something where, like, you don't hear about science, but like when they build new telescopes, you don't know that it's being built unless you're like deep into that, and that's not
right. If that's your thing,
Right. It's not like you're scrolling Twitter and you came across. It's not like you have Google News and it's aggregating all your news. Like, if you're not going to specific websites or getting specific newspapers or magazines, you don't know that this stuff is happening.
And this is also back
scientific publications.
Right. This is the year 2000, right? So there's no X, right? There's no Google News feed, right? Where, because you liked something, there's no algorithms back then, right? Where you could have accidentally stumbled upon this, right? It would have to be something that you were genuinely interested in and you were doing your own research to find information out about these things. Exactly. Yep. You were actually putting out effort to find out and do your own research about that.
Right. And then to suggest that, they're researching black holes and how to harness this, and they're the ones that sort of catalysts for creating this. It's just a which is the research they're doing now, and maybe have been successful to some degree. It's a far stretch unless you're in the scientific community, which again is not out of the question, but that's where I try to tie in. All right, so you understand about science. How do you know about technical drawings? How do you know about a car, a vehicle? How do you know about computers? I'm not saying you can't know about all of those things. Of course you can. But they are multiple specialties. And so, assuming it's one person, it could have been a team of people that all happen to have a specialty in all these things.
We're going to find that
which is part of the Matheny's explanation as well. It was a team of people. But regardless of the fact, how do you then, if it is one person or multiple people, if there's one person, somebody with that amount of knowledge doesn't have the time to do this. They're not going to have the time to go around and screw off on the internet and just make all this stuff up. but otherwise, it's like it's really hard to be so specialized in so many areas to that degree, and then to have the time on top of that to build all this narrative. And the story remained consistent. I've read through it a dozen times over the years. I mean, there's very few things he ever says that are contradictory to one another, and when they seem like they are, it's easily dismissed as like, well,
Yeah.
this or that.
You know what's interesting too? Just because, okay, so let's say that tomorrow you find out, holy shit, we have a time machine, right? It's real, right? The U.S. government has it. The Army has it, let's say, okay? They're not sending back the dudes that made the machine. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't necessarily expect him to know all of that specific information, the technical jargon and information about it. Yeah, granted, right? I mean, if you talk to a fighter pilot, they're going to know an awful lot about the plane that they fly. Right? They're going to pretty much know it inside and out, but they're not mechanics. They can't go in there and fix it. So that's kind of something to think about there.
Yeah, yeah. Reminds me of Quantum Leap, another TV show. Same basic concept.
Never watched it, but I heard of it.
The new one's pretty good too. The old one was so good, sad but good. Yeah, and I think that's what Titor tried to push the entire time too. Is exactly what you said. Is the guys that built this stuff aren't the guys they're sending on these trips.
Right.
He knows enough. He knows how to be the fighter pilot. But if things break, maybe he can fix a couple things so he can get home. But he ain't going to be able to deconstruct it. And that was what made his whole story so accessible for guys like you and I that's maybe can't wrap our head around some of these things. Is he talked about everything at a very high level, but he talked about it in a way that almost dumbed it down so we can understand it. So like you knew or at least he gave the sense he knew what he was talking about, but in a very accessible way you can understand, and he wasn't inundating you with a bunch of technical jargon, and maybe that was intentional so he didn't get called out by somebody that knew what they were talking about, but he knew enough to talk to those people too about the basis of the technology, where if we talked about cell phones and how they transmit wireless signals, like we could talk about that, but how all the stuff is built and crafted.
Right.
And
it's what I like to call the 10,000-foot overview.
The 10,000-foot overview. Yep, that's a great description there. What do you think we're going to find out? This is where I want to leave us. It's been 2 decades since we really tried to dive into John Titor right from the beginning. Things have aligned. Some things haven't. There's been other opportunities over the years. Mad Cow sort of came back for a little bit there and disappeared again. Do you think we're going to find out it's true? You think we're going to get a whopping dose of reality?
I think this would be the best scenario, right? Is that there is a multiverse, whatever that means. There are parallel timelines, and we eventually find out that he was real, the story is true. And why I'm saying a multiverse in different timelines is I don't want a civil or a world war in this one.
Right. We escaped the clutches.
Yeah. If this one could be the one to get out of it, hey, listen, sorry everybody else on those other timelines. That really sucks. Hope you're okay. Just don't want it happening here, right? To me, that would be the most fun,
Yeah.
I'm sure some shithead's going to be, oh, you fucking, you don't care if other people die on other timelines. Yeah, it's another timeline. I don't give a fuck. Sorry, buddy. But to me, that would be the coolest thing. Yeah.
There's a bunch of multiverse movies that say we're going to blend. Exactly. There was something I heard recently, and I don't remember where, the context of it. So somebody out there that hears this or reads this, maybe you saw the same interview. But it talked about time travel, and they said that time travel is possible, but what people have always misjudged for one reason or another, because they're watching a lot of movies, is that you can go back and change things. There are fixed points in time. And when you time travel, you are an observer, and you can't change to in the past, because effectively the way time is working is it's not linear. It's all happening concurrently. So right now is happening the same time as in a few seconds, which is happening a few seconds before. And so when you're traveling across it, you aren't actually impacting anything. You're just sort of observing from a different aspect of time. I started to gravitate towards that theory, and I think I've always sort of gravitated towards that theory because the multiverse theory just doesn't add up to me. It's just, I know our minds are a little bit limited and we think of everything as a physical object, and people want to talk more spiritual. And I do believe there's a spiritual element out there. I'm not discrediting that. We did a whole episode on it that you guys could watch by the time this one comes out. It's a couple weeks ago on astral projection, remote viewing. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that, for all intents and purposes, and I'm pinching my finger for those that are actually listening, we feel, we touch, we are physical. So as much as there is a spiritual, there also is a physical. And I have a hard time believing, or wrapping my head around maybe, that there are multiverses that are existing in the same plane with all different physical aspects that go on infinitely. I do think to some degree, as infinite as the universe is, I do think it is contained in some degree. There has to be a beginning, there has to be an end, just the way things are, to some degree. That might be beyond our comprehension. It might not be the way we think about it, but that. So the idea of time existing, time is a construct that we as humans invented based on our rotation around a glowing star in the sky, the sun, right? And so we are the ones that came up with this idea that time, our age, is based on rotations around the sun because it was something tangible we can calculate. You talk about dogs all the time and how they have dog years. My kids are always into that now, 7 years. All that's doing is just itemizing their life against ours, saying that every 7 years for a dog is like a year for a human, and that's probably changed now as dogs live longer. If you were to leave our solar system, if you were to leave our planet, your time would be different. You'd loop the sun in a different path. Sure. So that would make you older or younger than you are on Earth in effectively the same moments that have passed, right? Everything we've done has been built, all of our time, all of our summits has been built around this rotation around the sun. Okay, I know that's kind of completely going a different direction, but to bring it back in, the reason I say that is, if you think about it from that perspective, how we are so subjective in our deciphering of time, and then you look at the possibility of time travel. We already know you can jump to the future by going out or getting close to a black hole and coming back, and maybe 5 years would have passed for you and 50 years pass on Earth. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's inconceivable to think that the opposite can happen in another place in the universe where mass and time dilation is a little bit differently. And so the idea to me that you're going back and you're just observing this time at a different era, I tend to think that feels more likely to me. You can impact, you can step in, but there are fixed points that aren't going to change. And that's what I would grasp onto more over than the multiverse idea. That maybe he did come here and maybe those predictions were true. Maybe his presence set those predictions off. Maybe it was just time dilation and his mindset of that was off. Maybe the rotation of the Earth shifted. Maybe it's just a complete misjudgment of the time. I don't know that it's a different timeline. If there are fixed points and you shifted everything, that could explain why everything for us has been bumped a couple of years. It's just a different dilation.
Wait a minute. Does that explain the Mandela effect? Was it because
that could
of John
explain
Titor?
the Mandela effect too. It could definitely. Well, they talk about the Mandela. You joke, but they talk about that a lot with time travel. Is that somebody could have come back and manipulated something or changed something, which changes your perception of something or changes everyone's memories of it, and it lingers in people's minds. Remnants.
A lot of people bring it back to CERN too, in the Large Hadron Collider.
Well, right. So now you're discovering black holes, and what do black holes do is they dilate time. They slow it down or they speed it up, depending on where you are in that hole. So with that said, that in mind, and the time travel perspective, that's sort of where I lean. It's a very long-winded and complicated way to describe something, but that's what that is. If I'm being honest with myself, Titor is probably bullshit.
Probably.
But I like
fun.
Holding on to the notion. Yeah, it's one of the most
fun
stories
bullshit,
to me.
baby. Yeah.
And it's not an aspect of it, with the exception of the timeline things, which again you can argue and dispute. No aspect of any other part of the story has been discredited, and nobody's taking credit for it. And so that's why even Ong's hat, he's come out and said it, right? He's come out and outright admitted it, he gave his evidence. That people don't have to believe it now, but you've had somebody that took credit for it. Mm-hmm. Why has nobody come out and done it? Even if you think it's Larry Haber and he tried to do the movie, well, why not just admit it now that it didn't work? Why not keep shipping the movie? That would make a great movie, make a great TV series. Why not keep shipping? We're in the era of sci-fi right now. Why not?
Yeah. When you said that, when you brought him up, I'm like, man, why has nobody made a movie about this or a book? Or, I mean, that would be fucking killer, man.
Somebody owns the rights, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Larry.
Well, I think this this Titor story for me, definitely one of the most enduring internet mysteries. Definitely our favorites of all time. Probably indirectly the catalyst for why we're here today. So for those of you who are out there, if you liked this one, you want to check it out more, johntitor.com. I'm going to promote the heck out of that only because that's really been the catalyst for our whole journey here. I don't know how long it's going to be up there, guys, so you might want to go check it out sooner than later. If Oliver Williams, if you're out there, please contact us. We'd happily have you on here and just pick your brain on what you think. And if you want to just give up the website, I'll take it over and try to keep it all as long as I can keep going. Just
for anybody that found this interesting, and you want to deep dive and go balls deep, you got to check out the website. I mean, you could read every post. I mean, you could, from the beginning to the end. Check it out, man. It's fun. It'll
be ours. It's a rabbit hole that we'll spend. I'm on it right now, just scrolling, and I've already moved my thumb 35 times. The site's definitely broken in a lot of ways, but there's so much good stuff on there. Actually, of course, the first thing I pull up, the basics of time travel start at CERN in about a year and end in 2024 or 2034. So in about a year, that was in 2000. So 2001, he's saying it starts and ends in 2034 with the first time machine built by GE. Too bad we couldn't post pictures I'd show you. So there you go. Bada bing. And then he ends up saying that where's a site that I can post pictures without including personal information, which is eventually how he gets the pictures up there. At the time, you couldn't post them on bulletin boards. Remember that, people? All right, I think that's taken up a bunch of your time. We went way over.
If we don't stop right now, we'll just keep talking about more posts and more shit. So we got.
I know. We could literally read this and be on a 24-hour show, just reading through the stuff and talking about it. Again, we're happy to do another one. But if you're out there, like us, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Rumble, follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook. I don't know, wherever else we are, Tim. But do that. Share it with a friend. That does help us out quite a bit. At the time of this posting, we're just shy of 200 followers on YouTube. Or no, is that YouTube? Yeah,
YouTube.
So that's exciting. We want to hit that threshold. Hopefully, by the time you listen to this, we're at 300, 400, 500. We enjoy doing this stuff. So the more you do that, we're not asking for any money. We're just asking for a little support. So
just come and hang out.
Thank you, everybody. And remember, time's construct, everyone.